We're not going to teach. This is not a workshop. This is a workshop, which means that together we are going to explore the wisdom of the group. Actually, that's something that Ellen and I have prepared. But first, let's introduce ourselves. Elin Kelsey from Canada. I'm open research activist and children's book writer. You'll introduce yourself more fully on. I'm Stephen from Heuvel. I'm a theological ethicist based in Belgium, where they have the nice beers. As you can see,
it's true.
You've listed some of them as well. I've been here, privileged to be here before. 2 years ago, actually, I also speak at this conference on hope. And Ellen and I have prepared this a bit. I'll start with a statement on where I'm coming from in studying hope. The climate justice crisis, what motivates me. And then Ellen will do this from her side, from her expertise and background. And then it will take about 10 minutes for that. So that will be the top-down plenary thing, let's say. And then we take time to explore together, activating hope in this crisis. And we have a number of questions actually to you. And together we will try to make this a workshop where we can activate. Well, it's already very rich this morning. We talked about how enormously stimulating and how much of the work is actually already been done, like we presented here before. So this is as much a harvest and bringing focus in what we talked about in light of the climate justice crisis. Now I come to the topic of hope as a theologian, and his name has already been mentioned because someone who is truly motivating me in my studies looking at hope as a theological virtue is Jürgen Moltmann, great German theologian, passed away a few weeks ago at the blessed age of 98, June 30 died. A very fascinating theologian. Why? Because he came to Christ and to the Christian faith because of hope. He was a prisoner of war at the outbreak of the Second World War, and he was a prisoner, unbelieving prisoner, and around him he saw soldiers, other prisoners of war, literally dying because of the lack of hope. Their nation lost the war. Why keep on going? And actually, in that context, he came to the Christian faith because he recognized in Christ and in the Bible this perspective of a God who calls us to a new life, a new existence, a hope beyond this world, but not disconnected from this world. So he made an enormously important contribution to thinking through the Christian language, very much in the way that Heather experienced it. If God not being out there, disconnected with God being in the midst of us, going through this transformation together with us, the crucified God, one of his books, and also this appeal of hope. So that really became for him the burning heart of the Christian faith, a hopeful, eschatological perspective that is not there just the last chapters, let's say, of a dogmatic, but the burning heart of theology, the thing that sort of makes us get up in the morning and commit to not really establishing the kingdom of God ourselves, mere human activism, but together with God, moving in this, we fight the same movement of God. That is, as a theologian, why I'm committed. That's where I'm coming from in my commitment to the climate crisis, where we very much need a hopeful perspective. We are besieged by doomism, by let's say a narrative of let's say it's all going down, and we cannot save ourselves, and there's a lot of grief, but also grief is a hopeless grief as well. A lot of people tuning out, and that is, I think, a narrative that we have every reason to challenge and to come with a different perspective, a hopeful perspective. It is not an unrealistic hopeful perspective. That you also have a very immature form of hope that says, well, it's actually optimism. It will all be all right anyway. That is not the hope we're talking about. We are talking about a realistic, engaged hope. But anyway, that's my perspective on that. And now, Ellen, you get to it.
Thank you. I just want to say, is that Jonathan? So nice to see you. I just want to say that Jonathan and myself, thanks to Stephen's kind invitation, we're part of a podcast series for the Susanna Wesley Foundation. So I'm so glad to see you in person. Thank you, Stephen, so much. So it really is this united interest in the role of hope within climate justice engagement that brought Stephen and I together, and such a privilege to be able to work together and with all of you. And I think where I'm coming from is coming very much from an ecological background, and also within the realm of a new discipline that has been gaining a lot of action within the last 5 or so years, which is this whole discipline of eco-emotions or climate emotions. It comes under either name. And so really a burgeoning field that is looking at the psychological impacts of the climate crisis and the ways in which people are responding to those. A lot of research being done now in many different places is showing us these very strong feelings of sort of fatalistic doomism. So, and what comes with that are feelings of eco-anxiety, so a form of anxiety about the future of the world, and also ecological grief and those sorts of things. And I've just come from Helsinki 2 days ago, where I'm working with Panu Pikala, who is a climate emotions researcher, who's created the first phase model of eco-anxiety and environmental grief. And so we're working with climate justice influencers online to try to take that academic model and put it into a popular format to be shared by social media, because that's where the majority of people, 25 years of age or younger, are getting their information about climate change and are expressing a lot of these feelings. But I want to be clear that those feelings are not restricted to youth. Those are absolutely such a broad range of climate emotions. And in fact, there are many scholars at work and practitioners trying to create new words even for the kinds of feelings that we have in response to the state of the planet, and broadening it to include emotions such as joy or pride, or all kinds of, not just restricted to within those that we might recognize as lament-oriented words. My particular interest in all of this is that we know for climate change, for example, climate justice, that the number one way all of us hear about the state of that is through the media, and the media is very oriented towards a problem identification framing. So the current statistic is that less than 3% of all the media we hear about climate change even mentions a solution. So we tend to have a sense of the world as if it's already too late, too big, past us. And I'm in no way saying that we don't have real urgent climate issues, biodiversity issues, plastic pollution issues. But this impression that we're collectively holding of a doomed situation not only present, fatalistically into the future, is very powerful in terms of its capacity to disempower us. And there's a lot of research that shows this active disempowerment that is occurring. And there's a lot of mental and emotional well-being issues associated with that. So I'm quite interested in the construction of doomism, and then how do we challenge that construction? And underneath that, I'm very interested in resilience, not only within ourselves, but of other species. So I would say also our construction of how we understand the greater than human world is really impacted by all kinds of assumptions and histories that really come to bear. And so that becomes there. And then I'm approaching hope from the perspective of an evidence-based hope. And what I mean by that is, in contrast to that only hearing about 3% of a solutions orientation, is to say, where do we know, not only in the future that things could be better, visioning that, which is very important to do, but also what's currently already happening that we see is starting to bear the fruit of where we need more of. And because we don't know much about that, we were speaking about that at lunch around fast fashion, for example. When we know that, when we know that 10% of all of the fashion industry now is about thrifting and sharing, that's very empowering to know, and then we can do more of that. And if we don't know that, if we think it's a drop in the bucket and I'm the only person wearing a used dress, we have a very different sense of our own power. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm very keen on intergenerational projects, because there is a lot of ageism in the way in which we deal with climate justice issues, and there's a lot of division within there, and so collectively working cross-generationally is quite crucial to this and many other issues. So we thought, I hope that was about the right amount of time, didn't take too much, I hope. we are very interested in what your hopes are for this session. And we thought that might be a great way if we just quickly went around and if you'd say a word or two. And I was realizing after this morning, perhaps it should be your wish for the session, because maybe you don't expect that it will be met. But if you wouldn't mind, just a word or two, what you'd hope for. Yes, please.
I'm Bernadette, and I'm a former member of staff. I'm really interested in this idea of eco-emotions and the language that we can have going with that. Indeed, you were talking about new language, which would be very interesting to me. I remember being at the Climate Justice March a little while ago in California, and there was just a little kid carrying a placard saying, "I love trees." And that hit me more powerfully than any statistics or whatever, because it's just a simple statement from a child, "I love trees," and that really made me think about his future world.
Tony, one or two Tonys. Just a couple. I'm interested in exploring how this could be fed into parish life and linked in with worship life from Sunday to Sunday, season of creation and such like.
Yeah, Tony again. Interested in how it can be fed into parish life, but more specifically working with the youth groups to help them, to recognise climate anxiety in them, to acknowledge it, see what we can do in terms of conversation about how we can ease that and have some less doomism and more optimism, or hope, right, not optimism.
Yeah, so I'm Jonathan. I'm a student here at Roehampton studying environmental humanities, and I think what I'm kind of most interested in for this session is about kind of how nature and climate issues can become exciting and engaging for young people. And I think in the way I've kind of looked at it and approached it is through the idea of nature connection, because I think with a lot of people in urban centres and young people just don't have that connection to environment anymore. So I think if we reintroduce that, then we've got a base level of what young people want to save. Because I think, certainly myself, I was very into climate issues and getting very exhausted from finding ways to save it. But when I actually looked in towards myself, I thought, what am I actually saving? What am I valuing? I don't know nothing about nature itself. So I think it's about getting that message across, because I think that was what would activate hope in the future. So I suppose that's kind of what I've been a little bit interested in discussing.
Hi, so I'm Virginia and I come from the School of Psychology in Whitelands. The reason I'm here is because recently me and my collaborators are writing up this research now that we're interested in what children know and think and write about climate change. My discipline is actually in psychology of language, so it's about children's communication, but my colleagues came up with the idea. So for running 10 weeks, we actually asked using a already established website to ask children, primarily aged 9 to 11, but some a bit older, to write in 100 words across 10 weeks about 10 climate topics. And so this is an established website, so it was basically from schools from all over the world, English-speaking countries. So we received more than 1,000 essays of children primarily of primary ages writing a lot about concern. More than half those are relevant, and they relevantly wrote about causes. But then over half of those also wrote about mitigating actions. Some of them are pretty sound, including scientifically very sound, so it's not just hoping. So there's also the realistic expectations. But there's also a bit of, let's say, lament, and also a lot of anthropogenic causes attributing. And so there's a little negativity as well. And so we're writing up that we're just wondering, this is set up, can we use the same platform to encourage more about the hopeful mitigating, actions.
Jeremy, I guess I'm quite interested in the systemic nature of the hope, and the fact that it seems to me that it suits big corporations and certain people in politics that people lose hope, because then we lose pressure. Either there's no point trying because it won't make any difference, or actually it's all going to be okay anyway. So we were talking at lunch, weren't we, just the fact that most of this has got to come from a systemic, regulatory, government responsibility. But if government tells a narrative around that either strips hope away so people don't take action or are pushing for it. So I guess it's that hope and action. I think we talked about some talk this morning, and Dan was talking about this morning that hope always leads to action. That's quite interesting. How do we challenge governments to create a space for action in a way that actually changes behaviour in ordinary people? Because it does require change for everyone. It's got to come from the centre.
I'm Tim. I'm somewhere over quite a long time period between my first degree was actually in earth sciences, so I was studying the climate in the mid-1970s. So in many ways this is nothing new to me. But as I was saying to Steve this morning, I actually, by coincidence, been asked to run a section for an MA programme on a theological take on the current climate crisis. But I think the key reason is neither of those, and that is I'm a grandparent. I remember when our first grandchild was born 17 years ago, I remember thinking, good grief, other things being equal, she'll live in the 22nd century. And my phone, you might just see me looking at my phone, I was just checking Daisy's WhatsApp messages she sent me. She's wanting to study, she was out there Edinburgh yesterday to do either philosophy or theology. And I'm looking forward to conversations with her when I get back, and I think it's her and our other 3 grandchildren that I'm particularly interested in, not the backward or the forward academic stuff, but the reality of that generation.
I'm Susie, lots of resonance in terms of reasons for what's already been said. I'm a theologian, ethicist, just embarking at the moment on a qualitative research project around hope with a grassroots community, which may also involve ecological activists. I've been involved in ecological kind of projects in my local community, and I have 2 primary school age children. We're going on the Nature Now March on Saturday, and thinking about how do we engage them in hopeful action, actually. And how do I engage in hopeful action myself? Not least because of these kinds of narratives, really. And that's really, I guess, the research project and that I'm starting, which is understanding how people act for hope, what hope means to them. And does it map onto anything we say that hope should be? And what the books say hope is.
I'm Evan. I think for me, when I hear the words climate justice and hope together, I think there's something about hearing the stories of people across the African diaspora and their stories, that there is real suffering, and you know, I don't think that being in the UK or in the West that we actually see that, or the real issues that's facing the Caribbean in terms of rising sea levels that will wipe out communities and a way of life, and that I think if we don't start to hear those stories and recognise that there is a real crisis of, you know, when we start to see climate refugees, for instance, because they can no longer continue their way of life that has been there for hundreds of years, and that some of this is tied up in terms of colonialism and transatlantic slave trade, that just the exploitation of resources, that scarred landscapes that made these nations even more vulnerable to aspects of climate change. So when we talk about resilience, then some of that has been ripped out, and we have to recognise that there is a disparity there.
I
think I could come at this from a number of angles, theological, but I was just thinking that a lot of my first degree, I went to art college and I still paint. But as an artist, I think knowledge about the climate is about teaching people to see. I know David Hockney in his books said that drawing is about drawing the spaces in between. And drawing is about, and art is about really looking. You really have to perceive. And I've been doing a little project. I only live a street away here. I've been doing a little project. Over the years, I've built a little garden around the tree in my street. And I've noticed one or two other people, instead of just dumping their rubbish around the tree, have started wildflowers. And when I was in Brixton, a very inner city church, it's about a long time ago now, I said to one of the children there, started talking about buttercups. And he says, "What's a buttercup?" I mean, I would never have questioned that because I was brought up in County Durham and it was a mining area, but there were very small villages in general countryside. And buttercup and how you held it against your neck to see if it was butter. It was totally. So I took the children from the church and the young people for a walk right out in the countryside around Box Hill. And we found buttercups and we talked about them. And I think it's about helping us, for where we live in the city, bringing those conversations in, the discovery of nature, having respect for it, really seeing it, and seeing what space and understanding it there is around that. I think that helps with people being able to perceive what is actually happening, and also giving them a language. Buttercups totally disappeared from someone's vocabulary. That's extremely important. So that's kind of what I'd like to come at this from.
Hello, I'm A.P. Alexander from India, currently in Oxford on sabbatical for a few months for my research. As a person, like in my context in Chennai, we are affected by two major issues with climate. Every year, the cyclones, the hurricanes increasing, and every year in the month of November or December, the city gets into flood. The city with more than 6 million people, complete standstill, no electricity, we will not be able to move. The conversations that we have in our place is that we need to get prepared for worse things to happen in the years to come. So while the wish is at a higher level, the expectations are very low. So my expectation for this session is that how can my expectations be built up, and on the academic side, on my writings on flourishing, shalom, I write about ecological equilibrium, so I'm interested in knowing what the others are talking and researching.
Thank you for mentioning your involvement and Guy recently, great saints of the church. He said about hope, that hope sets you at odds with the status quo, like a runner. No number of balance with staying still, you've got to move. And I think where I've seen it in ecological movement, which I've been interested in various ways for a long, long time, is there's a danger of a rather pernicious form of Puritanism, everybody vying with each other as to how miserable they can make their lives. And I think celebration and hope and joy have to be in there on the mix. I think panicking will get us moving, but to keep on panicking, we'll go round and round in circles, like Corporal Jones, if you know the series, not able to do anything at all. And I think that's where a lot of us have got. And I've taken to watching kittens doing silly things on Facebook rather than face the news. And I really understand that avoidance of the news. I think hope is what we have to teach, practice and believe.
I think for me, thinking about the future, avoiding despair, coping with anger, seeing what is my personal responsibility and where I can be involved with others, and where theology comes in with that as well.
Bala, is there really any hope, given the way, particularly the Western governments are moving? The possible new government that we might have in our country greatly reduce their climate ambition. The current government jettison most of their climate aspirations. And when you look at the elections, European elections in Europe, you see the march against or towards populism, which almost by definition deny climate justice. So where is the hope?
Well, what a rich harvest. Ellen and I think, are very right when we realized beforehand. I think there's great wisdom in all of you. So our job is not to bring new knowledge, but simply to explicate all various parts of knowledge and questions that you all have and just bring them together, isn't it? I mean, that's very true, because it's all there. There's the equal anxiety, there's people looking at health, there's a health strategy from various perspectives. So we've heard quite a lot, and it's very rich. We've made notes, both of us. We'll actually continue the exploration. I'm moving to the PowerPoint.
Do you mind going to the slide of the futures?
Yeah, I will.
I think we should go straight there.
Okay, I'll go there. It's a very hopeful statement of me. Let me just see.
You can find it.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be fine. It's so.
And maybe while Stephen's doing that, just some things that sprung to mind as I was listening and we were going across. I think the realms of social justice that I think are underpinning what we're talking about here, I think it's very, to me I find it very powerful that 42% of the world is 25 years of age or younger, and the two values that keep coming up over and over and over again are climate change and social justice. And in fact, it was the movement of youth that have changed the language of the Climate Change Convention to be about social justice, so recognizing these systemic issues that underscore this. And so I think that is being reflected in this conversation as well. The rise of news avoidance, that is absolutely something that's going on. And we'll talk a little bit about solutions journalism after this. But when we think about the kinds of things that are important around situations of flooding or situations of climate refugees, I think what's really powerful there is this rise of nature-based solutions and how we're looking now at what is happening within the Biodiversity Convention, for example, and the Climate Change Convention, how those two are now seen as wed. So we know, for example, the rise of marine protected areas, which are happening at a global scale very quickly. And now we have agreements to protect 30% of land and ocean by the year 2030 to hold governments accountable, but that movement is actually happening quite dramatically. We're seeing the importance of that in the sense of how we ameliorate or respond to these kinds of crucial issues of flooding and loss of other species. So this interplay of recognizing the resilience of other species and what happens as we make moves in those kind of directions is very powerful. And I just wanted to add too, within that justice framing, we can track, for example, the rise of climate law and what's happening there and how that is moving in this recognition of who is accountable from the global south, from the global north to the global south, for example. So a lot of action going on in real time, and I think that's where that evidence-based source of it becomes super important to be also aware of in relating to ourselves. Stephen.
Yeah, we managed.
Yes, thank you for finding it.
So, this is actually a courtesy of, I think, one of Panu, so who designed these pictures.
This is actually from a Norwegian researcher who uses this as a way of exploring with groups of many kinds, including you. Please go ahead.
Exactly, yes, exploring futures. So here there's three scenarios, I hope you can see. The uppermost picture is a bit of a dystopia, where the world is grind to a halt, extreme climate change. The middle picture is one of technocratic solutions, you could say, where through technology we've been able to ameliorate the crisis. And the picture down below is an ecocentric picture, you could say, where we have sort of re-centered and sort of understood ourselves in a very genuine sense as only one species and have adopted accordingly, leading to agreement. We have two questions surrounding those three scenarios. Which of these you wish to happen? I think I'm getting the picture there. But interestingly also the second question, which of these species do you think will actually happen?
And maybe we should just take a poll.
Yeah.
How many of you,
Yeah, that's a great idea.
which of the visions of the future do you wish will happen? How many want to talk?
Yes, be
Yes.
brave.
How many would like this one?
Too many trees in the last one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not enough lights.
Be honest, be honest.
Yeah, thank you. And how many would like this one?
The ethical.
Okay.
I want the trees, just not where I live.
Yeah. And then I think this is so fitting for what we were talking about this morning between wishes and expectations.
Yeah.
But how many of you think the first is likely to happen? Right. And how many of you think the second is likely to happen? Yeah. And how many of you think the third is likely to happen?
Probably not for the reasons I would want it to happen, though.
Do you want to say more about that?
say more.
Yeah, I suppose it's a strange sort of pessimism feeds into it because it looks like the type of world that will claw itself back from a humanitarian disaster. Because the idea that the climate crisis, of course, isn't that the world will be destroyed, it's that human beings and their ability to live at the level that we live today will be destroyed. And so if something happened and the population was reduced to 500 million, we may well be living like that. So it's a strange utopia.
I find it really fascinating that I think that they're culturally packed, because I think if you asked people in other parts of the world which they would choose, I think you'd have different stories. So even like the bottom one, there are parts of our planet that are just like that, but you know it's becoming more of a challenge, and there are parts of the world where they don't necessarily want to be moving from place to place at fast speeds, and it's culturally not what they want to do. They want to live in harmony. So for me, I think that the pictures are culturally charged.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, the thing that worries me about the second one is not actually about the flying cars. The thing that worried me is that those trees, are they indigenous to that place? Because they're all identical fir trees, which are not particularly environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
Maybe the place that they are very cold countries, but they're not environmentally friendly here. Those kind of trees, and that's what put me off. They look a bit plastic, and I don't like the architecture.
I was looking at the last one with the trees, just being to be contrarian. Just the fact that we've had various politicians promising they're going to plant 20 million trees, 50 million trees, 200 million trees, and we'll drop the fuel tax as well. You know, there's a world in which politicians plant trees as a sticking plaster to the real problem, which is carbon emissions.
Yeah.
So if trees, but having got trees like that around our parish church, I can tell you now I would not want to live with that level of gloom. There's a place and it's not right.
Maybe they just really like Christmas in the future. That's entirely possible. Yeah. Now this is exciting because and I saw there's some dynamics already in your answers as to feasibility, wish versus expectation, and I think we should explore that a bit more, shan't we? And you did some exciting research on that. Maybe you want to shall I take it to the next slide? Perhaps?
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. What time would be? Sorry, I'm just keeping track. There we are.
This is your.
Yeah. This. Yeah. I think what's happening to there's just so much for us to talk about that I want to make sure that I'm being respectful of the complexity of all of these issues. That's what I would really love to say. I think if we bring forward this idea of ourselves as one species amongst, I think the current most popular number is 8.7 million other species. So there's some idea it could be 100 million, it could be whatever, because really the rest of the world is very, other species are not so well understood, actually, where we are with that. And I think what's interesting when we looked at those scenarios is they're culturally packed, as you said, absolutely, and they also have assumptions that we have around other species and what's there. And we learn these assumptions as much as we have them deeply within us. So I might ask you, for example, what is this a picture of?
Everyone's quiet because it's got to be a trick.
The elephant in the room. How many think it's a picture of the elephant in the room? It's an elephant, yeah. How many of you saw the elephant? I promise I won't do anything mean to you. That's okay. Yeah, I too see the elephant. There are many botanists who talk now about this idea of plant blindness. That in fact there are many species of plants in this image. But we learn as young children in kind of a way that you were speaking, even though you were talking about lost words in a way. We learn not to, in some way, see even what is in front of us in an ecological way. And I find these very helpful ideas to think about what am I missing when I'm looking. So this would be an example of plant blindness. And those who look at those.
I think there is also a point connected to hope, because once you do not see the plants, you also miss out on a great store almost of hopeful resilience that is in all those other species, because those other species are also coping with a warming climate, sometimes quite successfully. And we tend to focus on those who cannot and do not, and we need our help. Actually, a bit of a paternalistic understanding there.
Yes, yes.
And maybe we can solve it around and think, what can we learn from all those adaptive species?
Is it plant blindness, or is it that we give priority to different species? So we may well see all the different plants there, but depending on who you are, we all said that we saw the elephant. If you said we all see the trees, we probably would have said yes, but I'm just thinking there is a hierarchy that we build in terms of what that scene might be.
And how helpful it is to recognize the hierarchies we may be carrying and then challenge them. Where are they coming from? I think there's been such a rising interest in the idea of communities that exist across trees, for example, and that probably the idea of a tree is the wrong level of unit, and that they really are these communities of forests, and that we're just talking about them as if like my arm was the unit rather than my whole self. And so Suzanne Simard's work that looks at these fungal root networks and how trees preferentially send energy to one another is changing forestry practices, for example, by recognizing the importance of the collective. So the hierarchy is such a valuable piece, and to be looked at and then challenged and re-understood.
In other words, talk English, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I shall move to the next.
And then I just wanted to share sort of other ways that we can look at something. How many of you, when you look at this, see circles? And how many of you see squares? So how many, just your at first, you see circles? And how many of you see squares? And how many of you see both? Can see both. And how many of you, now that I've said circles and squares, can see both? Yeah. This is from a very interesting study looking at how we culturally are oriented to the shapes we see, the patterns we see, and including those within nature. So in this particular case, this work was done between people living in urban settings, in Western setting in the UK in this particular case. And because of spending so much time looking at square shapes and looking at screens and that sort of thing, we learned to see the squares. And it was contrasted with Namibian people moving about the land, see the circles much more often right away. And so again, even what our brains are oriented towards is influenced by how we learn, what we've done. And to me, that's incredibly hopeful because it means that we have the capacity to see difference and then to develop within ourselves new ways of looking anew at issues.
So I want to say to you, show me the circles.
Yes, I still can't see them, but I have a solution. The way to do it is to drink Belgian beer.
Then you see styles if you drink it.
You see,
Oh, yes. So interesting.
What's the name of this image? Do you know?
I can send it to you or post it after. I just find it so interesting.
So this means that the resilience comes from other species, but also from within our own species, as human species. That is, that is, I think, the lesson. And if I can make one comment connected to this, on also, this language of despair, and will we eventually make it or not? Connected to that is a certain anthropology. And maybe just a few words about that, because this also goes to anthropology. How do you learn to see? In ecology, very important is, of course, Harding, the tragedy of the commons. This idea that if there is a piece of common land, that it will inevitably overgrazed, because the costs are, will be shared by the community. And this is a piece of fiction, because people do not, in fact, unless we train them to, they naturally, they're not at all overgrazed the commons. The tragedy of the commons is only a tragedy if you have a conception of human being as a homo economicus, right?
Yes.
And actually that's the level where our own negativity and pessimism is coming from. It has to do with how you see. What do you see when you see the news? You see one story and it gets reinforced and so forth. So it creates a false circle of And so this is an exercise to make a connection to that point.
Sorry, that's wonderful. Yeah.
I'll put up the.
If you have another image.
Yeah.
So probably many of you enjoy maps, to ways of seeing the world. I thought this was a very interesting one, looking at the number of bird species named after European surnames as a way of looking at colonialization and how it impacts our understanding of the ecological world. And in the same way that Stephen was using this example of the tragedy of commons, which many people just believe is a truth, and therefore that's what's going to happen.
Tragedy of
the commons. So this idea of sort of ultra competition is always going to play out. So no matter what we do, that's what's going to happen.
Common land,
So if you have a common area of land and everyone has a right to graze on it. The tragedy, the commons is the more you graze, the more you gain. If everybody does that, the land dies. So that's the tragedy of the commons. Is there's a collective interest in not overgrazing, but an individual interest in overgrazing. So that's the clash with the tragedy of the commons, and it plays out in all sorts of ways.
I think it ended up with the rich people stealing the land from everybody.
And then that's the next phase 2 of the tragedy of the commons, the Enclosure Act.
The Enclosure Act were all about the commons. Yeah.
Yeah, and lots of challenges to those. The Nobel Prize was one for the tragedy of commons, and then it was one for the research that showed, in fact, it's a collective. It's much more likely to happen. So I think what we're really interested in collectively is how do we continue to keep our ideas moving as we understand other ideas. So here, yes, we can look at bird names and be able to look at colonialization, but I think even deeper than that, we can say, how do we understand the greater than human world around us is really influenced because of this background. And then we bring that understanding to the world around us and then use it to justify our own behaviors. So we say, so what is natural is to have a strong boundary and to compete for it and to look after, as if that is a truth. And instead of seeing that, with the vast majority of species and the great complexity of it, there is not one truth that, sits there on top of it. And I was telling Stephen, one of the favorite things I'm learning lately is that as we start to diversify even who are ecologists more, we now have many more, those who might self-identify as female, running research labs. And in the case of songbirds, which many of you will know from here, it's a beautiful time of year. It used to be the idea that only male songbirds sing, and they sing to make a territory, and they call females into it, right? How many of you have heard that story? But it turns out that over 72% of songbirds, the females also sing. So it's at that level in which we hold these truths about ecology and therefore what is our tendencies within ourselves. And at that basic level, even when they're singing, we don't hear them.
And the story about Linnaeus.
Yes.
The gender of the plants.
Exactly. Linnaeus saw the gender of the plants, and then in some ways Linnaeus, who was the person who first started the taxonomic system that still sits with us today in botanical definition and others, at that time was very innovative because was the first to say, oh, plants have gender, they have sex, this is a big new idea. But then imposed upon it the idea of little women and little men. And we know that in flowering plants, for example, more than 94% of flowering plants are non-binary. So we end up with these very different ideas of what is this planet that we're on that cause us to sit in fixed stories that are actually very open to new understandings.
Yeah. Moving on to
Yes.
more hope.
Yeah.
We are going to share this beautiful collection, really.
I wanted to touch on this. I mentioned the 3% only that mentions a solution rather than just a problem. And I'm in no way saying we don't need to know about the problems, but what is happening now is a rise of a whole field called solutions journalism. And in solutions journalism, we're looking just as rigorously at those things that are moving in directions we need more of, and in what conditions and in what circumstances. And what I find very powerful, these are just some sources. And I'm happy to say, when I started talking about solutions journalism, even, I don't know, in the last 7 years, there's been this explosion of solutions journalism sites now. Many of these you can get as something that comes straight onto your email or whatever form you tend to get news on. I think solutions journalism will continue to rise because of this issue of news avoidance that was mentioned here already. And that's a particularly worrisome trend for news media. We're seeing an exponential rise in news avoidance. So you are not alone in being overwhelmed by a steady barrage of negativity. And so the movement is towards a rise in solutions journalism. And as we were speaking at lunch, for me this is very hopeful because when you know something that is moving in the directions we need more of, and you can point to where it is happening, it is very politically powerful as an argument for more of that, while you're saying, I also want much less of this. But it becomes important to know. And I'll tell you, if you immerse yourself in solutions journalism, it really does cause you to look towards which things are pulling us into the future that we want more of. It changes how you see the world. And if I were to say one thing to do with youth groups is to decide, for a week, let's immerse ourselves for even half an hour in solution journalism. It really would be an interesting discussion point of what did that feel like and the kinds of things that emerged that you never thought were possible that are actually already happening. Please.
If I can just tag on a few points, but also connecting it to what Odette was telling this morning. Again, here I think the key is also in anthropology again. Because this negativity feeds into this zero-sum understanding of the world, whereby why would I do something if the others don't? And the very primal reaction, still it's governing national strategies or lack thereof currently. Whereas if you take this perspective of essentially one of trust in in the future, in other people, in other human beings, then this evidence-based hope becomes a great catalyst of that hope, because you see that others are also engaged in peacemaking, living within the needs of the planet, and all kinds of creative understandings. And again, it goes to how you view the human person, and do you have that trust in one another? Do you have that fundamental hope or not? I think that is a quite crucial dimension. So it connects throughout the day. We were very lucky, Ellen and I, because we were listening and thinking among ourselves, yes. Essentially, what we were going to talk about is already being told, and our job here is simply to make the connections, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's really, really accurate. And I did want to mention that in the climate emotions research, it's very clear high levels of distrust, of skepticism, of institutional betrayal, those kinds of feelings. And I think that in a sense, where I find the promise of solutions journalism is that it allows us to do that necessary confronting of the reality of the problems we face, and then look at how in a diversity of ways are others in many places also responding to that. And so it isn't that naive hope, or it is coming from a recognition that Michael Mann, the climate scientist, talks about the construction of doomism as, I would say it was, we had that beautiful slide of the politics of cynicism or skepticism. It's a constructed narrative of doomism to hold you in place. And so from that perspective, it can be a decision of empowerment and justice demanding to demand of experts, what solutions do you know are moving us in the right direction around critical floods or whatever issue we most face. That's a demand rather than to say, oh, I'm just pointing it out to make me not worry about flooding. It's not in any way about that.
But it requires work. The first workshop this morning was very powerful because he pointed out that in this conversation with the friend, there's the temptation to get stuck in this negativity cycle and to reinforce that with one another. But then she said, but wait a minute. So, that is a virtue, sign of virtue, that you challenge yourself in that, and hope is a virtue. And virtues they need work, you gotta work on yourself. It doesn't come. It requires discipline and attention, and you don't have to do it alone. But you've got to find others that also help to reinforce that virtue. But it's a contested virtue. That's why the title is great, Challenging Hope. The virtue of hope is challenged. But as a virtue, hope can also challenge, in this case, the dominant story of doom. I'm Dutch and you're not, but I will be the one to nevertheless do shameless self-advertising. I'll lead the way in shameless self-advertising. Yes, I'll take it away.
You're Dutch.
You're very Canadian and very melody and all the time. Oh, see. Yes. Oh, small punishment. And to pull me away from this. Now, this is a bit more context of where we're coming from. So I'm connected to the Hope Project, which is this interdisciplinary initiative around health. And I am also, in that context, myself and others are also writing on hope. And actually, not just myself, but also I want to mention the work of some of my colleagues at the Erasmus University in Rotterdam, developed the Hope Barometer, some very interesting studies, how hope and the motivation to be involved in, let's say, environmental actions are strongly correlated to one another. So, on the basis of measuring hope, there's a very strong connection. This is not just us intuiting along the way. This is not just a research hypothesis only. Fortunately, at this point, there is some research to point to make that connection. Now, you have also done research.
I wanted to mention in that realm of yes, so I this is my book on Hope Matters, which is essentially a argument of the need to, in the same way that we wish for the futures that we want, and that's so required. I think it's extremely important to recognize that which we already are at and demanding more of what we know has meaningful implications. So there's ideas like that in Hope Matters. I know there's a few people had some last questions, and I think it's 4 o'clock. Do you have a?
Yeah. No.
Yeah. I really recognize a lot of commonality of interest and ideas, and there are so many people now working in this area. That's what I'm happy to say. This used to be a very almost, what are you doing talking about hope? It's so, don't you understand there's a crisis?
Yeah.
But that is not what's happening anymore. So I guess just to say, Stephen and I are very interested in this and would love to continue these conversations beyond here and collectively in whatever way that best served. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.